Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Let's see if I can actually get the chat all to work. I know in OBS version 30, while I'm looking at that, let's open 10 packs here. They're gonna try and have an even better, like, revamped YouTube live streaming interface, and so with that I imagine I can handle live streams a little bit better and the chat a little bit better as I'm experimenting with that. Speaking of experimenting, for the accountability section, I've just been very slowly, very poorly programming still my macro. It's just rotating the time frame, the hours, the minutes that things are supposed to be scheduled, and then formatting the hours. Sometimes in military time, sometimes not in military time, formatting the date, sometimes with a padded 0 at the front, sometimes without a padded 0 at the front. I basically, since I'm trying to get it to multiple different services, am being forced to have it in every single format possible. Yeah, see, and I don't think that chat really, I was trying to post the chat rules, and I did post the chat rules, and it is not updating in the chat on OBS. Version 30 of OBS is also going to, I can't even get the chat back now. It's also going to have, let's see, the possibility of more vertical dock bars. Man, nothing I'm doing here is gonna help me, is it? Everything here wants to make it complicated. There we go. Yeah, I basically had to close the chat and then relaunch the chat. See, this is the kind of slowness you definitely don't want at the beginning of a stream. So yeah, apologies for that. I literally just woke up after spending most of yesterday doing that. I did have some other distractions yesterday that got in my way, but yeah, by default, my main complaint at the moment is just the UI vision not really letting you do quite enough programming to handle it, and I will definitely have to take some blame too to say that my programming in JavaScript is not good. And you know what? I realized my spelling is not very good either. Like, I'm dealing with function calls that are like called get minutes, and by default somewhere I picked up a habit of misspelling the word minutes. I'm misspelling it minuets, which is how I always think of it. So minuets, which is not minutes. It's a minuet. It's a dance, I think. And that's fine if I just make a variable called minutes, spelled minuets. We got some new things to waste some gems on here. But then when you're actually calling a function, you can't just misspell the function and expect it to work. But it's so that's certainly not helping. particularly considering how these macros work, which is that they just kind of run and then either crash or give an error on that specific step. But since the macro is so long, I have to run a 3 to 5 minute macro potentially just to test it. It's taking 3 to 5 minutes instead of a more rapid, you instantly try to run it and it just says we've detected this error, something that a compiler would actually do instead of a interpreted language, which I hope I'm using the right terms here, of JavaScript. But yeah, it's getting harder and harder to navigate the shop. But yeah, mostly the problem is just getting the functions to getting the variables to have the right information in them. They're constantly, something's going wrong where it's constantly trying to convert what should be the number of milliseconds in a date time object into something else that it can't handle, and just getting the functions to trigger and knowing when the functions should trigger. And it is complicated, the scheduling idea, because it isn't as simple as just take this time and schedule a video every day after that time, because inherently I don't want videos scheduled on Monday and Wednesday. We'll start playing this event. I should have been playing this event before for my pre-recorded footage, so I then have to tell it to figure out whether it's a Monday or not a Monday and Wednesday, it's Saturday and Sunday. Yeah, I don't want pre-recorded footage on Saturday and Sundays. So on that, that takes extra programming, and I want to leave it open to the potential that I might have pre-recorded footage that only airs on a specific day. So I potentially might have a pre-recorded footage only on Monday, or only on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or only on Tuesday and Thursday, whatever. But then also I want the trending YouTube Shorts to make 4 separate posts or 5 separate posts, and I want that to be fairly easy to adjust, where it's putting it at 4 or 5 different time slots per day, because there's just so many of those, and I don't see an end in sight in that until YouTube Shorts just stop becoming useful, which some of my experiments have already put out YouTube Shorts with names on them, and those are getting considerably more views. So the name in the title definitely is going to be helpful. How helpful, I don't know, because now YouTube has said they're going to get rid of links in the title, description, and comments, so there will just be no links whatsoever available. That they're promising some alternate to having hyperlinks, but almost certainly the YouTube Shorts are going to not be able to point anybody back to any other social media sites, or even in my case, a more direct use would be to try and have links directly to the game. And so I imagine there's going to be a massive amount of people going, what's the link on my YouTube Shorts once that happens, and then I'm just not going to respond to them. Like, the idea of link in the description is effectively going to go into the trash as a concept if YouTube does actually if that's actually going to go into play, which it likely is. They've also gotten rid of end screens, and they've changed over just the past couple days how that really works. Beast Warrior. Winged Beast, Winged Beast. So we want to start with a Winged Beast of some sort. Then we want to do this. If that lets me do that, then the question, I guess, is going to come down to which of these things do we want? Almost certainly I would say it's this. I don't know what I'm trying to send to the graveyard, but we might as well do it, because there's really no reason not to do it. Let's see. Looking for something that says if this is in your graveyard, this can be banished from the graveyard, so we'll send that. I guess I could have added that to my hand instead. Well, my soon-to-be dead favorite anime waifu gacha game, Destiny Child, is still going on with basically a rerun of some of the previous experiences, but giving out what is really massive amounts of rewards. That being said, they have taken away more and more of the content that almost certainly was never going to be in the Memorial Update. They really haven't talked about what the Memorial Update is really going to look like, but if I was to guess, it is literally just them going throughout the game and removing buttons, because there definitely is a button that's just missing for the leaderboards of the most recent event. And yeah, maybe they could program it. I'm hoping that the starting screens, which are unique, might be unlockable some way. That you would, every time you load the screen, you get a different loading screen, or you could cycle through them. Ideally, you'd want to be able to cycle through them. But you're getting so many rewards through the platinum chests in the game. Usually you get a platinum chest and it's barely worth anything. Now you're getting costume boxes that are very expensive. You're getting spa skin boxes. You're getting large amounts of the premium currency of blood gems, which for me is going to put me in a decent position to almost certainly unlock most of everything I'm looking for in the game. The only slight concerns are maybe I won't be able to get all the spa skins, maybe I won't be able to get all of the premium costume shop skins. I probably won't get all the puppets, which doesn't matter. I probably won't get all of the soul card artifacts, which that kind of sucks. But and I'm a little short on gold, just good old basic gold. I don't know what ones I should grab, so let's grab some of the weirder ones so I can see if they do anything special. I probably need to be more careful to make sure I get a Beast Warrior and a Winged Warrior. But apparently not. Again, it seems like the best move is this one. go ahead and detach something. And then I guess what I probably want is something like this to add it to my hand to then summon it because of this. Starting with this card was very helpful. And this will add me a card too. I'm in a very weird place overall as I'm wrapping up Destiny Child, as it's soon going to be end of service. In that I do have a decent chance that I'll go back to playing seriously, like I do have a decent chance of going back to play Marvel Snap, but I right now am fully out of being interested in Marvel Snap, so I definitely would be coming back to it having missed some content, which is not really a way to play those kinds of games. That you really cannot fall off of a game. You need to play it from day one if you want the best outcome, if you're going to be a free-to-player. And even at that, most games are not going to work free-to-play. Regardless, I suppose we'll have to move to the news fairly quickly here because I really don't have that much to say. It is, I guess, kind of nice to take a week off after finishing Trine. Like, and honestly, I barely even remember Trine a couple of days after stopping playing Trine 2. But yeah, I'm still more kind of thinking about Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which shows it was at least a longer game, more impactful game. So we're supposed to banish things. I guess the question is, I felt like there would have been a lot more cards in this deck that you would have activated from the graveyard, but it seems like that's not the case. Regardless, this does seem like this is just a standard tit-for-tat deck that, at least against this opponent, has won just by overpowering the opponent and outplaying the opponent, just barely. He suicided there. And see, this is those cases where we're going to need to play a lot. There, and you can see Dark is winning way better than Light at the moment. But yeah, to get to this card protector, we're going to have to win several times. And we'll want to try out each of these decks once. But yeah, I wish I was accomplishing more, certainly, as I'm taking this week off. I am actually kind of accomplishing quite a bit. What happened there? If everything works, if I can get my programming to work, being able to have things just manually scheduled to Patreon, Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, which, yeah, I haven't even gotten to working on Twitter yet, and having that program so it's very rock solid in general would be great. I doubt I'm gonna go to the direction of I doubt I'm gonna go in the direction of having a lot of like Odyssey, Rumble, BitChute posts or anything like that, but there is a tempting thought certainly to go with Rumble, particularly if I was just desperate for money and low on morals. But yeah, Rumble's not the one I'm even thinking about, is it? I'm thinking about Kick. Yep. If you're low on morals and don't mind like promoting gambling, then Kick is somewhat of a tempting thought, assuming Kick actually stays around, which is part of the problem, is nothing actually stays around. Nothing actually competes against YouTube. Because I haven't started making any new pre-recorded footage, I haven't started to stream on Twitch. But I also can't just pretend like my channel getting accidentally deleted didn't happen. So staying with YouTube alone is not acceptable. I almost wonder, and there's no way to really test this, if maybe my channel actually benefited somewhat by being deleted, because maybe that removed it from whatever recommendation metrics it may have had, because almost certainly I do think that the YouTube algorithm has a lot more coding that it is programmed itself to do to not recommend things than it does have coding to recommend things. It's not picking the top cream of the crop, it's just de-recommending, de-labeling, lowering the chances of videos getting seen. Yeah, I almost certainly would assume that the YouTube algorithm is way more negative than it is positive in the way it promotes stuff. And by that I mean it probably has way more code that says this gets a ding in its metric as far as how often I'd recommend it, versus this gets a check mark to show it should be recommended more. And they even kind of explain that too. Is they say the people who are subscribed and click the bell for the most part should be all getting notifications, and then a subsection percentage of your subscribers also get notifications when a new video goes out, but not all your subscribers. And then if it's performing well, a larger percentage of your subscribers will then be recommended on top of a larger percentage of people who aren't subscribed to your channel. So you always start off at this net negative and have to just continuously try and perform better and better to even try and reach all of your subscribers on YouTube, let alone people outside of it. And certainly I would say think about it from that perspective. That does seem to be the experience that I've always had with YouTube. Is I'm not getting a ridiculous amount of notifications. They definitely are fighting notification fatigue. But even at that, if you're on the recommended suggested page and you're not on your subscriptions page on YouTube, you absolutely don't get all of the videos that you're subscribed to being suggested to you in the suggested page. If anything, almost none of the videos that I'm subscribed to or from channels I'm subscribed to are on the suggested page. Instead, my suggested page is mostly full of one or two things that I've already watched, or one or two categories of things I've already watched being recommended to me again and again. In all fairness, I am somewhat willing to listen to the exact same podcast type service or stream, even that specific airing, over and over again in a lot of scenarios, because I just want background noise. Anyways, we're already starting late, so we probably want to go through the video game news. I don't want to stop playing Yu-Gi-Oh! This early, but let's go through it. There's not a lot of news. The Xbox 360 marketplace is going to be shut down in July 2024. It won't affect the ability to play or re-download games that have already been purchased. So for the most part, I think very few people are going to be affected by that. Inherently, it is my understanding that if you have an Xbox 360 disc, most of those plugged into an Xbox Series 1 or an Xbox One or an Xbox Series X or S, or an Xbox One X, any of the later generation Xboxes, would then lead you to get some kind of backwards compatibility streaming ability. Well, I got wrecked there. I don't think I really had much of an opportunity to figure out how to play the cards there. You're getting these two currencies now. Also, it is very possible that the Xbox Series 360 is still very prevalent. I bet a lot of people still have them. Until maybe about a year ago, I had not one but two Xbox 360s. Heck, I may have even had three at one point. I kind of feel like I might have. I had a black one, I had a red one, and I think I had a white one. And I don't even know. Yeah. At least one of those was a gift, and it was given back to me. So yeah. I wasn't really playing an Xbox 360 in the past 10 years, though. Or past however long Xbox 360 has been out. So, yeah. The game collection is far more my concern as far as people having Xbox 360s, is that they would want to plug in a lot of those games into a more modern console. There's definitely an argument to buying like a used Xbox One X if you can find it cheap, than even buying an Xbox Series X, which though the X series would be the only ones with disk drives if you're trying to continue to reuse your 360 catalog. I kind of question, and certainly Xbox Game Pass has tried to nullivate the fact that there's just so many game discs out there for the 360 that people have access to. They were trying to nullivate that with the core Xbox Game Pass concept. But I don't think that's actually as cheap of a solution or as good of a solution. And yeah, a lot of these games that would be Xbox 360 discs are going to be particularly old. Of course, most of them are still very much in the range of what I'm playing on my channel, Killer 7. is airing on my channel right now. It's a particularly old game, but yeah, there definitely has not been a glut since the launch of the Xbox Series X of brand new AAA, super pretty, super modern looking games. Nor has there even been a glut of just new games for new consoles. We've been in a very recent drought, obviously, of new games around the pandemic. But even before that, there really hasn't been that much new content being made, because increasingly people are spending $300 million is what one of the numbers that was thrown out recently around the development of a AAA game, and they're just making bigger and bigger games, which means fewer and fewer games. You look at all of the Embracer Group people, they're not making medium-sized games or small games. You look at all the Microsoft and all their acquisitions, they're not making medium or small size games. Let's see. So, because nobody is making small size games, okay, pay 2,000 of your life points to potentially summon something big, I would think. That being said, doesn't seem like there is a lot of big things to summon. No idea what I'm supposed to be doing here. I don't know if any of that really is going to change anything when you're facing down a 3500 thing. How is this my first turn? How did he get so many cards on the field? It must be that I just can't attack this turn. There's been some talk around this game Dark and Darker, and I've not really paid much attention to it, but apparently the US copyright case was dismissed. It'll be tried in Korean court system. Despite Nexon's protest, its case against Iron Mace over Dark and Darker may be hashed out through the Korean legal system. I feel like at some point there was a listing of a different game called Dark to get it relisted from Steam. Nexon DMCA Dark and Darker, taking it down from Steam. Then it got a different publisher. This this is a one of those cases again. Oh shoot. Turning that to the hand is not what I really wanted to do. So we still really are at a point though where the story around Dark and Darker, like a lot of these legal arguments, are stories that happen a lot more often these days and really don't have enough clarity in them that a consumer can really even begin to figure out who might be in the right. And usually it's nobody's in the right and both sides are just being jerks. But we definitely have seen slightly more examples of publishers being jerks. And screwing over developers or claiming they own games that they don't potentially actually own. Which that is certainly the dark side of doing business with a publisher, which almost every game developer has to deal with a publisher. That is probably one of the reasons why acquisitions are slightly more appealing, is that in these cases, if you're acquired by Embracer Group, if you're acquired by the likes of Microsoft, then that internal publisher also owning you as a company eliminates a lot of at least some of the scenarios where a publisher might just stop funding you or screw you over or claim they own your game. It just stops being in question once you're just a subsidiary. Although there is, I think, in a lot of companies still some weirdness between departments, where some departments and some managers of some departments still may be jerks to each other, even if they are supposed to be one big happy family. Moving on, GameDeveloper.com says that NBA 2K24 is adding a second $20 season pass for players to buy, which, yeah, monetization is crazy considering how these 2K sports games are literally just sports games. And it definitely shows that sports games players basically only buying 2 or 3 games a year are willing to be led by the nose and forced to buy even more season pass and other kinds of garbage. Noticing this animation is particularly poorly done. Like, obviously you would want to take this metal part on this wing or this collar and spin it a little bit instead of having it clipped next to each other like that. The new guy in charge of YouTube, I don't even know if I'm ever going to remember his name, tweeted out a link to this article, a long-term vision for YouTube's medical misinformation policies. What's interesting about this is when they say long-term vision, it really just rings to me that they're admitting that they don't have long-term visions for most of their actions and policies at YouTube, which in all fairness is almost certainly the case, is that they're just always working at what they would consider a breakneck speed, and they aren't actually ever thinking things through on any higher level. But okay, let's go ahead and activate this since nothing's gonna happen here anyways. Special summon this and then do what? Absolutely nothing. But particularly this seems to be focused around the idea of cancer misinformation, Of course, as a YouTube video game critic, I'm not going to be talking about medical information anyways. I'm not a doctor or in the medical field. Apparently, they're streamlining what is dozens of existing medical misinformation guidelines to fall under 3 categories of prevention, treatment, and denial. They will remove content that contradicts health authority guidance on the prevention and transmission of specific health conditions. For example, this encompasses contents that promotes a harmful substance for disease prevention. So if somebody's saying eating the skins off of bananas prevents cancer without any kind of medical authority, whoever they're going to use as their choice for a medical authority is going to be debatable. Treatment misinformation. In this example, they're saying calcium chloride is a treatment for cancer, which is similar to bleach. And then denial misinformation, such, for example, how many people have died from COVID-19. This is the headline, I think, is more interesting to me than anything there, as a video game critic, in that they are just saying long term. But it does, I suppose, also allow for perhaps going forward an effort by YouTube to streamline their instructions and their rules, which isn't the worst idea ever. Let's switch over to the dark side and let's play with this loner deck on the dark side and see how that goes. Clearly, if I read the description in the loner deck, which I'm not doing, I do a lot better. Gamatsu retweeted a new pinned tweet describing themselves, which, by the way, Elon Musk, being the troll that he is, has claimed that he's going to get rid of blocking as a possibility on Twitter. I'm going to just keep calling it Twitter. I almost, I think have been in the past very, very generous to Elon Musk, and I can almost see where his mentality could come from, where that might make some sense. In practicality, no, it doesn't work. If all of a sudden you have a service that was allowing you to block people, and you have stalkers, and you have people who have genuinely harassed you, then obviously all of a sudden them being able to come back and stalk you, them being able to come back and harass you, blocking both prevented people from seeing your content as well as for them to contact or interact with you. That's an insane idea. On some level, if that was the idea from the beginning, is that we were just not going to have a block system, then that would be different, certainly. But you can't pull the rug out from people. Now, the reason why I would say potentially that I can kind of see where he's going there is that there was a massive amount of people on Twitter and organizations on Twitter that had created block lists using third-party apps and shared block lists using third-party apps, and a notable number of people who have no idea who somebody was were finding themselves blocked just because they happened to follow someone else, which I think you could probably correct that mistake by having the people you follow be private by default instead of it trying to inherently be a way of pushing people to follow other people. Or it could have definitely been more obfuscated, where if you follow, say, 5 people, then you would be recommended some of the people that those 5 people follow on top of some random amount of extra people, and then that way you could never really know if one or all of those 5 people were yeah, you never really know if one or more of those people were the actual person following that person. So yeah, I could see the idea of block list. I could see the idea of limiting the number of blocks. I could see the idea of splitting up profiles on Twitter and saying, hey, if you are a public organization, you're not going to be able to block people in the same way. But even that seems crazy. Like, inherently, this definitely, as it's being said as a single short sentence on Twitter by Elon Musk, is not getting into the details of what you're thinking or what you're actually trying to accomplish there. If you're actually trying to accomplish anything. There is some very legitimate suggestions that Elon Musk is intentionally just trying to tank Twitter and bankrupt it. Which that doesn't really solve anything. If Elon Musk bankrupts Twitter, he can't then just make a new Twitter and have it succeed way more. He'd have to be basically intentionally trying to bankrupt Twitter for Mark Zuckerberg or some other service, which I wouldn't be surprised if they secretly are working together, even though they publicly fight like crazy. I don't see the real point of switching things back and forth like this. I'll be darned. That did do something. I was not expecting that to happen. I definitely was not expecting to steal the Blue Eyes White Dragon out from under your opponent there. Is that going to give the Blue Eyes White Dragon back to this guy? Nope. Yep. Darn it. Well, I darn screwed up there. I did something right, and then I did something wrong. And I kind of knew I was going to do that, but interesting gameplay, somewhat. But it's all for naught, really. Regardless of how many of these events might happen where you have slightly interesting gameplay, you're not going to really get anywhere with it. Like, I don't have these cards. I don't have time to really make a deck like this. And a deck like this is slower, probably, and less effective than Zodiac Tri-Brigade is. Well, this will probably be one of the last games we play. So let's start going through things. We have new games on sale, which I don't know if it's super informative to show what's on sale, but at a certain level, I could see trying to make YouTube shorts that would highlight each of these. I could take the Steam front page, I haven't actually thought this through, and get a list of all the special offers and try and show that off. As far as discounts, I would have to be really on the ball with that, though, come to think of it, and that's not something I really think I would want to try and do, because you really would need to get that video recorded and scheduled and out or made live as soon as possible for it to have any relevancy. Whereas the newer trending games, if they're a week or two late, it's not a big deal. Even if they're a month or two late, it's not a big deal. Although I am trying to program the scheduling to keep it all within 29 days, just because of Facebook giving that arbitrary thing. But I still really need Facebook to get rid of the arbitrary limit of 29 days. It makes no sense that I can't schedule videos on my Facebook page more than 29 days in advance. And there really is not much of a solution there. I could see 90 days being more realistic. Baldur's Gate 3, I imagine, is still very, very popular. There is something, certainly, though, that needs to be asked, or at least talked about as far as Baldur's Gate 3. Noticeably, in that Baldur's Gate 3 is rated M for mature by the ESRB. It has nudity and sexual content. It's not the main focus of the game, obviously, and honestly I don't think you're going to see that much of it for the entirety of your gameplay. But this is the kind of game that, if the adult section on Steam was ever going to be anything than just a way of hiding garbage sex games, Baldur's Gate 3 potentially should be in the adult section. And then that would be a great way to say, hey, we're not just subjugating the garbage adult games to the adult section, we're actually trying to somewhat legitimize what the adult section means, to the point where even something like Baldur's Gate 3 would still sell, even being in the adult section. Which definitely, I think, maybe makes more of an argument that there really shouldn't just be an adult section. Like, as a category, as an idea, maybe there should just be filters overall, and that in an overall thought that people are asked to make a profile, they're asked to filter out certain kinds of content when they first make their account. That might make some sense. Also, but yeah, Baldur's Gate 3, Witcher 3 are the last two AAA games I would say that really have pushed the narrative and pushed the idea that there can be adult content in adult games, and and that video games potentially could start to somewhat mature, but it is very slow going, to say the least, as far as that concept being something. And effectively, we've lost that concept completely in movies and streaming services and TV. We definitely have gone from like Game of Thrones being too much nudity and sex to HBO now. I don't know if they have any major amounts of that at all. I imagine like the Last of Us service doesn't have a lot of nudity and sex in it. And yeah, it is always been fairly shocking to me that Netflix doesn't have like an adult section in streaming service, and that almost everything there is nudity free completely. You can find a little bit of nudity in old movies on like Amazon Prime. I don't think you can really find anything on Hulu. You get like the edited versions, the TV cuts for a lot of things on a lot of these services. So there definitely has been a babyfication, for lack of a better term. A family-friendly filter has been added to content. Noticeably on Netflix you have a lot of like Korean shows, but you don't really have any European shows. And I wouldn't be surprised if there is a real reason for that. As it is, in that European shows where a topless lady is not a big deal just are not acceptable. I'm gonna wait for this to clear and then see what I actually need to do. We'll go through Video Games Chronicle as far as their news. We talked about the Xbox 360 store closing. Clearly not that many big stories that I really wanted to talk about today. Alan Wake 2's release date has been pushed back to late October. The quote here is, "We hope to get the date shift will give us more space for everyone to enjoy their favorite games," which that is them literally just admitting that they don't think Alan Wake 2 should or could, take your pick, compete with other things releasing at that time. Again, we are very much in a situation where, like we always are, in that far too many games are announced and released in the fourth quarter. They're, instead of spreading things out so that games would be released in the first quarter, second quarter, or third quarter. I don't know if there's ever really going to be a way to balance out the release schedules of games better. At a certain point, it would have to be almost a shift in general of how people spend their money and get paid, and how people have their free time. We may see some of that, though. I could definitely see the idea of I can see the concept of the summers being just so incredibly hot, since, you know, it has been incredibly hot, hotter than the last, they're saying, I think 100,000 years, that we've had the most hottest days in the last 7 days, which at a certain point, if you're going that far back, I don't know if you have believable written history, but whatever. We definitely have hundreds of years of almanacs that are fairly trustworthy. So yeah, if all of a sudden there was a societal governmental rule that all people stay inside or work in the evenings during the summer, that would make sense. And honestly, it wouldn't make a lot of sense for like public schools and there just to be a law to say all schooling happens between sundown and sunrise going forward. Alright. Let's see if we can pull something off here. Do I have a dark dragon? Nope. So I think the only thing I could do here is this. Then set this. Then I guess special summon something here. Might as well. Go ahead and activate this. Destroy this, I guess. And guess we're destroying this. Guess we're activating this effect. And then guess we're special summoning this. Wasn't I supposed to have destroyed that though? Well, I don't think that worked. I can definitely see the problem here though of having 6 decks effectively that you would have to learn, or at least 6 decks that you would want to boil down into 2 decks to play on 2 different sides to try and find victories. It's a lot of learning. You've doubled the learning by giving double the opportunities as far as different loner decks. You've also somehow limited it in that I don't think in this case you can actually pre-build decks. Let me double check that. I think I'm wrong about that actually. I think you probably still could pre-build decks, which means that there's still a chance that somebody's going to make way better light decks or way better dark decks than what most players would bother to create. Video Game Chronicles has the next 3 Epic Game Stores. Homeworld Deserts of Karak will replace Black Book and Dodo Peak, which are now free to claim. I guess I haven't checked the Epic Game Store in a couple days because I don't recognize either one of those games that are currently available. There is definitely this desire amongst Video Games Chronicles and other mainstream video game journalists, and in all fairness, if I was covering and playing Baldur's Gate 3, I would probably fall into that desire too, to just try and sell Baldur's Gate 3 on the nudity and sex, a small amount of which is actually in the game, instead of actually talking about its merits as an RPG game and a Dungeons and Dragons inspired game. Inherently, though, it is worth worth mentioning that the likes of Video Games Chronicles have not been particularly shy about re-promoting other people's articles and narratives that video games sexualize women, or that they're overly sexual in general. That when it benefits mainstream video game journalists, they definitely will try and white knight or pretend like they are hyper conservative when it comes particularly to adult content, and then they will speak out of the other side of their mouth and try and use games that are selling well and use sex to sell. Almost certainly, if you are talking about Baldur's Gate 3, you should be playing the game, first of all, which I am not, but you should almost certainly be talking about the entirety of the experience, not just a small subsection, regardless of what that small section is. I'm running out of steam playing all of this. I'm not really in a good position, particularly to come back and play this off screen later today while I'm trying to program, because I need to just focus on the programming, even though I'm not really in the right mindset for it, and that's why I'm struggling with it more. There definitely would have been times in the past where I would have just burned through the code and been done with it and gotten it done, gotten it all typed in correctly and running correctly logically in 1 or 2 tries. But I've run into a more difficult debugging section. I suppose for the accountability section, if we go back to that, I also am still watching Medium. I'm watching season 5 of Medium on Amazon Prime, and honestly, that whole season feels like it is just the anti-justice system season. Effectively, it feels like they got back to the way the first few seasons were, where she was working for the DA, but in this season, almost 100% of the time, nobody has been actually properly taken to justice. And I don't know if this was a desire or a different writer in charge for the season, or if it was a desire to say these episodes are going to air out of order in syndication by the 5th season. You would have known that you're going into syndication, so let's make as many episodes where it ends more on a tragedy, so it isn't just that every single episode ends with absolute success like the previous seasons had mostly done. Weirdly though, there is at least one episode where they show the oldest daughter as she's getting older driving, or at least learning to drive, and then the next episode she gets the learner's permit, so the episode's aired out of order clearly, which that is also a problem with a lot of these streaming services, is that they put things in the original airing order instead of putting things in the intended order, which almost never is the right decision. But yeah, with season 5, she often finds who does it but doesn't end up turning them in, which is making her look more and more corrupt, where she was more of a bastion of believing in the justice system and believing in the DA, and the DA and the justice system being the good guys always. But also there'll be situations where somebody else will confess and she knows that person didn't do it, but she can't prove it in any way, or that she can't prove, she doesn't have any evidence to prove that somebody has done it. Most notably in season 5 you have a young psychic or probably psychic kid being harassed by a ghost to the point where he eventually just shoots himself in the head, and they straight up show him shooting himself in the head. Maybe they cut to black right before the trigger is pulled, but then they also show his head with a bleeding hole, which is pretty gory. Notably, though, at some point around the 4th season, they really stopped with the horrific, dark sex crimes that were far too prominent at the 1st season in particular. I'd say also in the 5th season that they're growing out the husband character a lot more, although he is still very much mostly just there to be a foil and to question her, which at a certain point after everything that's happened you would think he would just absolutely always believe whatever she dreamed, or he arguably even the main protagonist Allison should really have a system where they are going to make her wait until she has at least 3 dreams and not really talk about anything or report on anything or act on anything until the 3rd dream, because obviously the format of the show is that she'll have 2 or 3 dreams, and then before she figures anything out or correctly understands and interprets the dreams, and the format is arguably a little too repetitive in that you are constantly having her have the 1st dream, misinterpret the 1st dream, have the 2nd dream, and misinterpret the 2nd dream, and then have the 3rd dream, and then finally get it. It's a little too repetitive. And that certainly is old TV in a nutshell, so it's very formulaic, and you wouldn't go in wild in different directions, which TV even now is still very formulaic, and you don't go in wild in different directions. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says that more than 220 digital games are going to disappear when the Xbox 360 games close. Not every game is on the service is playable on a disc or via backwards compatibility. So, yeah, it's hardly like it's a one-to-one conversion, although I would say you're not super likely to miss too much. Some of the titles are less of a loss than others, they point out, because there are better versions such as Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons or Life is Strange, all which have Xbox One versions. If we were to scroll down this entire list, like Bastion, Batman Arkham Origins, Blackgate, all of these have newer releases, I'm fairly certain. Charlie Murder might be one that hasn't been released on anything. Or Dishwasher Death Smiles, what is that one? The Dishwasher Versus. But yeah. Not really a list here that screams like you're missing too much. Resident Evil 0, almost certainly newer versions of those are available. Although if you were to put this on the other hand, Watchmen Part 2 may not be available on anything. If you told me that in a month 222 games were going to disappear from Steam, I think I'd be fairly peeved on that. This guy's just not playing. Or we lost the network connection. But almost certainly 220 games do get removed from Steam on a monthly basis, if not a weekly basis, and people just don't really recognize it. They just are not, they don't tend to be games that anybody ever bought, and so it really isn't an apples to apples comparison. I suppose if games of that same level, which you would call those closer to single A and double A games, if 220 single A, double A games left Steam in a month, people would be very upset. And that is one of the sales points that people have hoped to be true around Steam, is that you would always have access to your game. And it does seem like that is somewhat the case. Send the dark monster to the graveyard. What are we actively trying to send to the graveyard? That's my question here. Probably that. So sending that so that we can then summon something. And then let's see what we can now pull. 22, 26. Doesn't really feel like anything's working here. Tribute the monster. That effect didn't work. Okay, 4,600. I don't think you're gonna do any better than that. Video Games Chronicle says Skates, quote, the boardroom episode 4 details new tricks. This, I assume, is a teaser trailer showing off Wally's, Slappy's, boned ollies, or boned allies. No, I think that's boned allies. Variable speed flip tricks and head flip tricks, or held flip tricks. I'm not reading that particularly well. Seems like the boardroom is people sitting around talking more than anything. But yeah, obviously they're teasing more features in a skating game, which is definitely an idea. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 has been fully revealed and its release date is in November. Do we have a specific day? November 10th. So, alright. Mark your calendar if you're interested. A new Armored Core 6 showcase will highlight lore, mission gameplay, and PvP. Sega has finalized its acquisition of Rovio, the deal to take over the Angry Bird studio for £706 million. I assume that's pounds and not euro. And that may be euro, actually. Was announced in April. It'll be interesting to see if Sega can do anything with Rovio, and it'll be interesting to see if Rovio in any way actually has any games worth talking about these days. I've just lost, which that gives me a great excuse to certainly stop playing. I don't even know what they did to get rid of my cards. So yeah, the Versus Light and Dark event is obviously underway. We're getting notifications again, and the new accessories were added. And apparently some matching errors and display issues all popping up as notifications. We're at level 5 platinum. It'd be nice to go higher. Let's see. Yeah, if I could get to level 5 diamond, that would be great. I doubt I'd ever really make it to master, but yeah. If I had a lot of free time, getting to this point would then start me next month at level 5 platinum, whereas if I only make it up to even level 1 platinum, I still am going to end up starting next month at level 5 gold, which I'd prefer to not do that. However, I probably am not going to have that much free time, and I also need to spend however much time it's going to take me to play all of this to at least get the card protector. At that point, it might make some sense to stop playing. It would, if you could get up to 8,000 for 200 gems there, if you can get up to 1,100 or 11,000 to get 300 gems there, that'd be nice. Getting legacy pack tickets, not really worth it. Getting a title, not really worth it. And then, as far as all daily quests are done, well, there's a versus events, which obviously I've made decent progress on here. You get a different title if you can get 2,000 points. So you could be on the light side or the dark side. This very much sounds like it's trying to be somewhat Star Wars like. So yeah, you'll get a lot more rewards if you do all of this first. All of these daily quests with the exception of link summoning, which I get this fusion, pendulum, and link summoning quest far too often. So there's another 760 gems. And I haven't completely forgotten that there was a selection deck, extra deck, secret deck, I forget which one it was, in the shop that I was teasing on the idea of going back and opening some more packs on that later on, but I may never get back to that. I may forget about it. We're at level 90 with the battle pass, and we have 24 more days, so obviously we'll get to level 100 probably in this week and be done with all of that. Alright, so that's it for today as far as I'm concerned with Yu-Gi-Oh! Let's now just burn through the news fairly quickly, which the good news there is it does seem like I'll be able to that I probably will be able to burn through the news pretty quickly because it doesn't seem like too much has happened this week. Developer of the GTA 5 mod that let you chat with AI NPCs says it has been removed by Take-Two. The Sentient Street Story mod had NPCs who could be spoken to with a microphone. At a certain level, you wouldn't really even have to have artificial intelligence to have a microphone effectively catch the attention of non-playable characters. But without the NPCs being able to understand what you're saying, that they would just potentially just look at you. And that it is a little weird that that isn't a thing, but also very few people actually play with microphones on. And if they do have microphones on, they're usually trying to talk to other humans, not NPCs. I could see the idea of a stealth game where you have to have a microphone and it checks for like a baseline noise level, but if you speak louder, you'll set off alarms. Although I don't think that'd be particularly fun either. Limiting what people can say while playing a game is not a fun idea. And then with those side thoughts out of the way, the main idea here of NPCs potentially actually understanding what you're saying and interacting with you is not a future I particularly want to be a part of. Like, I don't want a bunch of lonely, sad gamers out there talking to NPCs like they're real humans. That was in part one of the scenes in that Steven Spielberg first movie, THX 1934, whatever the numbers were, where this person is talking to a computer and very clearly the computer is just playing back a cassette tape equivalent of pre-recorded platitudes instead of real human communication. There was a lot of stories like that where there was a lot of fears of computers in the 60s and 70s replacing human communication, conveniently ignoring the fact that real human communications in those same time frames were pretty hostile and aggressive, particularly depending on who you were and who you are talking to. Human communication has never been particularly great, so I cannot really damn talking to an AI computer on the basis that human to human communication is much better. But there is something to be said with the human brain being a much more conscious, creative machine compared to what AI is now. AI at the moment is the equivalent of talking to a sociopath who is insane and hallucinates. You generally don't want to talk to sociopaths with no morals who also hallucinate and will gaslight you and lie to you to your face. Yep. Yeah. And there's not any direct connection so far in that mod where it would make sense that you could have NPC characters and tell them what to do and that they would actually do something to help improve your gameplay. I could see perhaps a real-time strategy game like Command & Conquer where you could talk to the game and tell, to say simple things like Unit 1 to Position 5, things like that, and then the units would move to that position. That would make some sense. Or even a farming game where you would walk up to a character and say, go farm potatoes, like in Minecraft here. That would make some sense too. Minecraft apparently has been rated for the Xbox Series X and S. Right now, I guess Minecraft is just available with backwards compatibility. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some ray tracing shaders and things like that that would possibly make an Xbox Series X or S version of Minecraft a little bit more appealing. But overall, I'm sure that this is just a instance in which storefronts don't want to have Xbox One discs or Xbox 360 discs or shelves in general. They want everything to be Xbox Series discs, and I'm sure Microsoft wants that to be the case too. So, yeah, I'm sure Walmarts and Targets are trying to get rid of all the last generation shelves for game consoles and resell everything. Let's see. Larian is changing how it deploys Baldur's Gate 3 patches after rollback issues. The game's latest hotfix has now been redeployed. Apparently there was some kind of problem there. The rollback left players unable to load saves that they'd made following the update's release until it was redeployed again later that day. So yeah. You might make an argument here. I don't think too many people are going to be too upset about this, but if Baldur's Gate really had been in early access for 3 years, which it has, then why are they running into issues now that it is actually out? That does perhaps speak to a concern players might want to consider, in that the long-term support and the way this game is supported in the long term might not be as good as you would like it to be. If World of Warcraft was really great when it was launched, but then there was bugs with every single patch, and there was just a bad group of people running World of Warcraft in its first years, then obviously World of Warcraft would not have been as successful and not has been as popular. Now, it is far too early for them to have trouble patching things, and it's arguably a little early for them to even be patching anything at all, particularly considering how, again, they've been in early access for 3 years. They should be done fixing bugs at this point. Moving on, Like a Dragon Gaiden will include an Infinite Wealth demo. They also have a new overview trailer reveals. Don't know if Infinite Wealth demo means you have infinite money in the demo, or if it means that there's a game called Infinite. Yeah. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth is coming to the same platforms in 2024, so it is a different game. So, The Man Who Erased His Name will come with a trial version of next year's game, which argues potentially that The Man Who Erased His Name is going to be a shorter Like a Dragon game. A leaked Walking Dead game will, quote, let players alter the events of the TV show. And the update here is the first trailer for the Walking Dead game Destinies has been released. More and more, YouTube seems to want to age restrict videos. And YouTube is changing its ad blocking policies to stop you from using ad blockers and things like that. And so this is a fairly dark game, even though it's blurred. It clearly is being based off of the AMC storyline, which inherently I think makes a big mistake in assuming that many people care about the AMC Walking Dead TV series storyline. People liked basically the first season of The Walking Dead TV series, and then they hated the second season where they fired all the writers and replaced them, and then there definitely were people that I guess just kept on watching it for way too long because people kept on making episodes, but I don't think any of it really was particularly well received. And then I think the guy with the hammer with the baseball bat with barbed wire on it, I think once he showed up, Negan I think is his name, that's where people really stopped liking it. And they're showing me that character. I don't recognize that character at all. Yeah. Almost certainly what this is a case of is that they're trying to recapture the idea of the Walking Dead Telltale games and having different choices really affect things, but also still include the AMC storylines and AMC characters, which I doubt is going to work particularly well. I would say at a certain point now we can say it has just gotten down to ridiculous desperation to make The Walking Dead a bigger thing. And I guess inherently this highlights that a comic book can only be so popular before you really can't just monetize it anymore. And a zombie story in particular can't be monetized forever, and regardless of your desires there. But even the Marvel movies have run into that problem where it's just oversaturation. We've long since been oversaturated with Walking Dead games and comic books and TV series, and the only thing I could imagine is you could have Walking Dead be just a generic series of zombie games, but they'd need to be fairly cheap, and they'd need to have new characters and new stories, not allowing the player to potentially slightly change the events of old stories. I don't think anybody has really focused in on covering the actual comic book narrative, instead telling their own stories. Basically this cowboy guy, as I understand it, dies fairly quickly in like the first chapter of the Walking Dead comic. But yeah, there's not a lot you can do with zombie games, and it's better to just, for the most part, not try and do too much on it. That's why Left 4 Dead is perhaps one of the best zombie games out there, in that it gives you TV movie scenarios as levels, and so you're like in a mall or you're in a hospital, just a location as a scenario, and then a bunch of generic zombies are going to attack you, and the fun is just taking on those zombies and surviving. There is no real deeper narrative or story there other than just trying to survive or trying to escape. And so yeah, that's what I'd say. Zombie games are for shallow games and for shallow game players. They don't really work when you try to put a narrative around them. Like, if you are going to put a narrative around it, you probably should do something closer to The Last of Us, where the zombies effectively are barely even enemies and barely even a concern. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says Tencent is bringing back military first-person shooter series Delta Force. A teaser trailer for the new game has been revealed ahead of the full reveal at Gamescom. Tencent directly is creating, developing, and publishing this game? Yeah, weirdly. It's in development at Tencent's Timig Studio Group. Delta Force will be a cross-platform game for consoles, PC, and mobile. You know what I imagine and you always have this concern that Tencent is being overly influenced by the Chinese government. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a way in which Tencent, as a potentially controlled by the Chinese government game company, could have a series where maybe it's U.S. military soldiers, but they are actively not engaging with any of the allies of China. Weirdly, you are seeing here, seems like they are fighting people in the Middle East, or Italy, I think is what I saw. See if we look at this again. So, yeah. I could see that idea. As much as it is fair to say that a lot of the Western military shooters are somewhat propagandistic as far as the US military, putting them in a somewhat good light and putting them always on the right side of history. I could see Tencent trying to do the same thing, but just slightly steer the narrative. Whereas clearly, if you were just going to take the stories of what's on the news right now, you would be making military shooters against Russia. You would potentially have even naval battles against North Korea and China. Like, there's increasing tension, certainly, against the United States and its allies, and Russia and its allies, or China and its allies. And notably, Homefront was originally going to be a story of China invading the United States, and they changed it to North Korea due to pressure. That was many years ago, but it did definitely happen. Once you get into the Middle East and like African countries, some of them are more allies to China than others. So yeah, I could see how you could still steer the narrative. I could even see Tencent potentially having it be very nebulous, where you might actually be playing as Chinese military forces in these games. Delta Force doesn't mean too much. This is in part also still involved through THQ Nordic and Embracer Group, which Tencent, I guess, has major influence of Embracer Group, or fully owns them. I don't think they fully own them, but they may have a large share. Let's see. Moving on, Modern Warfare 3 campaign early access beta details and pre-order bonuses leaked. If you want to check that out at Video Games Chronicle. Last of Us HBO showrunner says that 4 seasons seems like a good number. I feel like that's a little under ambitious, but not super crazy. I did hear that syndication at the moment, and that's part of the thing that the Actors and Screenwriters Guild are striking on, never go into syndication if you sell a series to like Netflix. So they were definitely not getting residuals, I think, at all, but they were even less likely to get residuals because something streaming on Netflix is never being resold or considered to be in syndication. Which maybe the idea of syndication is a dumb idea in the first place, but it's what every contract was negotiated on. So it's the thing that they're going to continue to have their mentality around, whereas newer shows maybe don't have that mentality. 4 seasons of 26 episodes would be about 100 episodes, close enough for syndication. Even 4 seasons of 12 episodes these days may be good enough for syndication. The number used to be 100 episodes, but that number has gone down and down and down. Less and less people are watching TV and watching TV consistently. That the idea of having a show that you can run 2 or 3 episodes a day on to bring people back every single day is just a laughable joke. You look at something like TNT or TBS, and that was their whole schedule for their TV airings. Is they would show like 2 episodes of Supernatural, 2 episodes of Charm, 2 episodes of something else, and they would try to get people to come back every day and watch that. Eventually, I think TNT started to do entire marathons of shows, and that's where you see more of Sci-Fi Channel. Let's just do a whole marathon of a TV show for one day out of the year, and then let's move on to something else. Or mostly just show movies. Most channels, if they don't have anything, would rather catch people with a random movie playing than have a series. There are some shows that are random series, like daytime and news, that people will come back and watch every day, and Price is Right, things like that. Those are early morning for bored housewife shows. But yeah, as far as cinematic shows that would be actually in syndication and not brand new episodes every single day, that they have increasingly lost their value as far as being reruns, and the experience of watching things definitely makes a lot more sense with the in streaming form factors than on TV. Moving on. I'm taking too long, almost certainly. Sega says that Hyenas has been a challenging title and that it's adjusting its business model. Creative Assembly previously said the game won't be free to play. I wouldn't be surprised if it does at some point go to free to play, but if you're saying it won't be free to play to begin with, you're almost certainly going to at least release it as a non-free to play game. That being said, from what I've seen of Hyenas, it is a very weird looking game, and free to play almost certainly would have been the way to go. I could see it also being free to start and having just a fairly generous demo where you can only play as like one character or one random character per week. They inherently, I think, for Hyenas, if it's the game that I think it is, need people to be online playing against other players, PvP, which really does need free to play, and they need people to really fall in love with the game and play a lot of it, and that is going to be an even taller order if you're asking for any amount of money up front. Like it kind of doesn't matter if they were asking for $5 up front or if they were asking for $70 up front. Either way, that's going to severely reduce the number of people playing Hyenas and kill it as a game. It might as well be free to play to start with. And yeah, with Sega just acquiring Rovio, this may just be an example of Sega experimenting with things and not really knowing what to do with different types of experimentation. Sega has not been particularly good at making games other than occasionally getting lucky on a Sonic game, particularly lately. Moving on, Starfield designers share more story and gameplay details. Check that out at Video Games Chronicles if you're interested. We're so close to Starfield being released, though. It doesn't make a lot of sense to spoil yourself more on Starfield. Dead Island 2 apparently is coming to another platform in the next year. The game has already been released for the PlayStation, Xbox, and PC via the Epic Games Store, so almost certainly it is coming to Steam, if you would consider Steam another platform. Otherwise, it's coming to the Switch or the Switch 2. I definitely would be in a weird position if I really cared to play Dead Island 2, because Dead Island 1 is the only game really on my channel that's been age restricted that I can think of. But I don't think I'd really care too much about that either. Like, I'd be fairly fine with playing Dead Island 2 if I really wanted to, and then having the whole game be age restricted, it would be fine by me. As long as I don't do too much of that. And yeah. But it would make a lot more sense to play the other game from the makers of Dead Island 1 instead of playing Dead Island 2. The gimmick of Dead Island 2 in particular, I think, should have been that you were always on this island, and even in the first game, you, after a few hours, leave the island at a location, really. It stops feeling like you're at an island resort, at least. Moving on, Capcom has confirmed its Tokyo Game Show lineup and online presentation details, which for the most part is just an announcement for an announcement. We'll get more news, I'm sure, when the Tokyo Game Show happens. And then NetEase has announced a new studio led by the MMO veteran Rich Vogel. T-0 Entertainment is making an original multiplayer sci-fi game. I think it's always somewhat of a mistake to name your company based on your first project, because that definitely gives the feeling that your company won't stay around, or they'll change their name after that first project, or they're heavily committing to making sci-fi space games. This is an Austin-based T-0 Entertainment. Studio head is Vogel. Fellow developers are Mark Tucker, Scott Malone, and Jeff Dobson. A lot of these companies really do come down to 3 or 4 people that they're named, and I assume then they hire a bunch of other people that don't get the credits. An original third-person multiplayer action game set in the sci-fi universe. Vogel previously launched several studios, including Sony Online Entertainment Austin, BioWare Austin, Bethesda Game Studios Austin. So clearly he lives in Austin and makes a bunch of video game companies. He led the development of Ultima Online, Star Wars Galaxies, and Star Wars The Old Republic. There definitely are people out there that are just habitual business starters. That their real passion is starting a business and then eventually getting bored with that business and starting another business, and it doesn't as much matter to them what the business is or what's going on with the business in the long run. Moving on to video game news from Gamatsu. Quantum Error for the PS5 launches November 3rd. Capcom's lineup for a Tokyo Game Show scheduled, showing off, I guess, a Resident Evil 4 VR mode, Street Fighter 6, what looks like a Monster Hunter Now, Ace Attorney game, and Exoprimal. So maybe new versions of new games being shown off or released, or maybe just being shown off and they're already available. Tokyo Mario vs. Resident Evil collaboration shooting range. That doesn't sound like an actual video game. This Apollo Justice Ace Attorney bundle might be new. Monster Hunter Now for cell phones might be new, and Resident Evil 4 VR is old. Street Fighter 6 is old. Exoprimal is older. So, unless there's some other surprises, I wouldn't expect any surprises. Let's see. Macros Shooting Insight has been delayed to January 25th, 2024. This is interesting because the Macros series, if they're talking about the Macros anime series, which was one of the 3 anime series that were cut up and to make Robotech, there was an anime series also called Robotech. That was the first arc, and then there was Macros, and then there was a third series, I think, too. But I haven't heard anything that has been purely Macros mentioned in a very, very long time. And certainly jet fighters and robots and Gundams and things like that are in no way popular right now in anime. Anime is very much fantasy based. The last time they've had any notable Gundams that you would jump into, or robots or fighting robots, would potentially have been like maybe a continuation reboot of Code Geass. There was also another one that was popular maybe 6 or 7 years ago. There are the Evangelion reboots and continuations of movies. But yeah, overall, as far as new content and everything mostly being based on light novels, or yeah, a lot of new content is based on light novels. I just have not seen any robots or interest in robots. I just don't think the current generation of Japanese anime fans care about robots, and straight up just fighter jets and shoot 'em up things. It's kind of hard to think that those are particularly that cool these days. Let's see. Moving on, Radurgi 2 launches December 7th in Japan. I have no idea what this is. It's a shoot 'em up game, I guess. Ys 10 Nordics has its official trailer on Komatsu if you want to check that out. Everhood Eternity Edition has been announced for the PS4 and PS5 and the Xbox One and Series. Strategy RPG game Sword of Convalaria for this World of Peace launches for PC, iOS, and Android. Console versions are also planned. So this is a strategy RPG game, potentially. It's good enough for a YouTube short. We talked about the T-0 Entertainment. I question if there might be some benefit to having an online multiplayer focused sci-fi game instead of an offline sci-fi game. And these may very well try to be more like an MMO than it's really my first thoughts would have been. An open world survival crafting game called The Signal has been announced for consoles and PC. I feel like there was a game called The Signal before. Like, what was the name of that? No, that was called The Dig. But yeah, I definitely feel like there is something called The Signal that has been released, and that would just be a generic title and description, or generic enough name that it couldn't be copyrighted. Famitsu sales have been updated for the 7th through the 13th. I didn't realize that there were sections of Pikmin 4 that got inside the houses. This definitely is a different type of environment from what you would normally have seen. This almost feels like this might be a little bit of a mini game area, but no. Really does just look like that's the hyper realistic graphic style. Very much contrasts to the bright and colorful Pikmin style, and the fact that it seems like the world is not as abandoned as it seemed like in the first Pikmin games is a little weird too, because I kind of always got the feeling that you crash landed on an Earth that had pretty much died out because of pollution or something, and that it was hundreds, if not thousands, of years in the future, whereas this looks like it's modern times. So what's the new information as far as sales numbers? Past the 18th spot, you have a Nintendo Switch game for what I assume is a visual novel, and then a Pretty Cure Soaring puzzle collection for the Switch. Neptunia Game Maker R Evolution makes it to the 22nd position, and for the PS5, and that's basically it. I don't know if any of these hardware sales numbers have really changed any, but it is effectively the same old, in that PlayStation 5 is definitely doing better, but it's still getting its butt kicked overall over the lifetime sales of the Switches that are available for purchase, and the Xbox Series X is selling in much better numbers while still being incredibly small numbers. But yeah, it definitely feels like on a weekly basis Xbox Series X is getting closer to being 3% of the sales of the PlayStation 5, whereas in the past it would have been 0.003%. So exponential increase in sales. It just has a lot further to go, and with a new console, with a new generation, I could see how Xbox could potentially convince Japanese people to buy their consoles. Although you'd have to do a lot, and you'd have to get very lucky, and effectively people would have to have a major reason why they wouldn't want to buy a PlayStation 6 instead, or just get a Nintendo Switch instead, which mostly it's still just Nintendo Switch stuff. We still have yet to see any Steam Deck numbers, if they were actually competing, or PC numbers. Those are just never counted in the Famitsu sales. We talked about this narrative-driven action-adventure game, The Walking Dead Destinies, which, yeah. Some more screenshots here. That does make it look somewhat more like a game. I don't inherently hate the idea of playing the same locations and same events of The Walking Dead, but I would just say have those same locations after the events of the TV series. I would also say this sheriff guy's face does not look like the face of the actor, in my opinion. And I have no idea who this guy is supposed to be. Maybe this is the guy from the comic book, but it does also seem like he has a group of clones of these characters. And I only watched a little bit of The Walking Dead, so like I recognize that this is supposed to be the sheriff guy. I recognize that this is supposed to be that guy, but I don't recognize this person or this person either. I don't know if that's supposed to be Michonne or what. And I recognize this like Asian guy, but he clearly left the team at some point. The child of the sheriff character, is this supposed to be the child? The boy? That looks more like a girl to me, but whatever. But inherently, nothing really interesting happens that I know of in the AMC series, so redoing the narrative and the locations of the AMC series is perhaps just pigeonholing you in a lot of ways, when you could just tell a better story. You really could just go through a list of locations and randomly pick locations and think about how would that be interesting. If you went to a swim park and it was infected with zombies, what would a swim park look like? And that's just like Zombieland, as far as movie things. If you go to an amusement park full of zombies, how would you deal with zombies there? If you ended up in a mansion full of zombies, how would you deal with zombies there? There's actually some fairly interesting buildings. If you are in like one of those Dubai buildings, super tall towers, if you were in one of like the Empire State Building in New York, how would that really affect things? Or more interesting, maybe not be inside the Empire State Building, maybe just paraglide and slide between different towers in the New York skyline. And so it's just like rooftop to rooftop, maybe a few levels of repetitive zombie fighting on the top floors, and then you have zip lines to another location. That could be an interesting experience. You could certainly make a game where you're an extraction team trying to save people from zombies for money, and then multiple locations would be easily explained at that point. But Left 4 Dead at least shows the beginnings of that idea, where you have very different locations for each section. I'd say The Walking Dead is kind of slow in a lot of later seasons, from what I could tell. Seems like they got stuck in the same locations and stayed there for the entire season. So you'd just be in a swampy area, you'd be on the farm, you'd be in the city, or you would be like in a city, one of, I'm sure, a couple cities. Moving on, we need to move faster. Xbox 360 Marketplace to close on July 29th, we talked about. Alan Wake being delayed to October 27th, we talked about, although I'm not sure we got the date. Rune Magus Complete is coming to the PSVR 2 in September 19th. This is the first time in a long time that I've been reminded that that the PlayStation VR 2 even exists. This doesn't look terrible as a VR game, so I don't really have a reason why it's not on the fall list. Yeah, I definitely am still seeing indications that I've missed some percentage of games. And have not done as good of a job as I would have liked to, as far as looking at every single game on Steam and considering whether I want to purchase it. Apparently, the Crack Pet Show Happy Tree Friends Edition has been announced for all consoles and PCs. I'm not sure if Crack Pet are these characters. I'm not sure if that is something that already existed. Otherwise, I have heard of Happy Tree Friends, but not really paid much attention to it. This is something definitely to think about making a YouTube short on, just because it then will have Happy Tree Friends in the name, which is probably decent at search engine optimization. Although weirdly, you cannot put a game on Steam, or you can't put a DLC on the fall list without putting an actual game on, or actually owning the game. Interesting is single player too. Action roguelike. Does kind of have that Binding of Isaac feel as far as just being edgelord and edgy. So I'll go ahead and put this on the wish list, and then I'll see if my macro can make DLC shorts. It should work fine anyways, but I wouldn't be surprised if something happens there. So effectively, the Happy Tree Friends would just be a edition would just be a new set of characters and hopefully abilities. Excuse me. A game called Koira, perhaps, has been announced for Steam. Maybe Koira. Yeah, I guess that's how I pronounce it, Koira. Screenshots aren't really blowing me away as much as I'd like them to be. Hand-drawn musical adventure. It, I guess, heavily would swivel on how good the music really is based on reviews. A crafting adventure game called While the Iron's Hot launches November 9th. So we are getting announcements. This one does not particularly catch my attention by much. Although maybe because this is 2D, maybe the crafting element in the game overall is fairly short. And I definitely feel like some of these crafting, survival, mining games, if they were limited in their scope, might be more interesting. I could certainly see games trying to be the filler between Minecraft experiences. If you did like a Minecraft world and then you were a little tired of Minecraft, you'd go play another game for 10-20 hours, then you'd have done everything on that other game, then you'd go back to the more open world, play forever Minecraft concept after maybe some updates had been made to Minecraft, adding maybe some new features. That's how Captain Sparkles on his channel tried to do things for a long time, is that you would play a little bit of Minecraft, then you would try some other things, maybe even play a little Terraria. But eventually I think Captain Sparkles mostly has just boiled down to not making content on YouTube, at least unless he's making Minecraft videos, and not making that much anyways. There just isn't that many new things to do. Moving on, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 gameplay reveal trailer, first details and screenshots are available on Gamatsu if you want to check that out. Mega Man X Dive Offline launches September 1st, which, looking at this screenshot, you can see that there's two currencies here and that this is definitely trying to be a game. It's going to have a lot of microtransactions in it. Although the actual gameplay weirdly doesn't feel like much of anything they could work with that. It does actually feel to me like a Mega Man game. So maybe the double currencies and the offline aspect of this is going to get around a lot of that. And maybe that's where the offline part of this is that there's I guess my guess is you're going to just grind your way through the game to earn both of these currencies, in that they just didn't really rethink how that would work, to then grind up your characters and do a gacha collectible thing here. The thing you might want for something like this, and it seems like Capcom is not willing to offer, is that you would have a third-party account so that you could play it both on cell phones and on Steam. But yeah, I'm not sure that it's really going to work that way. Yep, this is the game. This is the kind of game that would take a little bit more investigation and certainly some feedback. $30 to get away from the microtransactions and gacha may very well be worth it, but you still very possibly are just playing a game that has a lot of gacha style gameplay design, And I just don't know how many events and how many new content updates you'll get when they're not constantly getting microtransaction income. Although inherently, every mobile game with microtransactions focus eventually gets shut down anyways for not making enough money. So committing to something like that is a tough sell. A game called Ghostpia Season 1 for PC launches August 22nd. I have no idea what this is though. Let's see. It's already available on the Switch. It has this pencil drawn art style. It's a visual novel with cute visuals that look like a picture book adorned with glitches and noise, and characterized by nostalgic expressions. Were inspired by the well-known expression graphic novel in the West. The work belongs to a genre called visual novel, but as a more graphical visual novel, we call it a denshi graphic novel. Denshi meaning electric in Japanese. So that doesn't seem like there's much of a description there. I would prefer more to know the story. Isolated from the world by snow, a town lies barren near the farthest station. The town exists where ghosts flood the streets at night, but we aren't really ghosts. We are immortal, unable to die with our unending lives. We took to referring to ourselves like that. Okay. Yeah. So it's a visual novel. Not really worth much more unless they were going to bother to actually give us screenshots to see what the game looks like more. A game called Promenade launches February 23rd, 2024. Let's see. Looks like it's in part a puzzle game. Let's see what we've got on the Steam listings. Images loading pretty good today, which, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow they don't load so well. This one's already on the fall list, so I'm going to have to assume I already made a YouTube short on it. Almost done with the Komatsu articles. The Playism show for 2023 is set for August 20th. It's going to be obviously just announcements of Playism games. 3. Eden Dot Schemata, the star named EOS or EOS, and Phantom Rose 2 Sapphire. NetEase Games announces an urban open-world RPG called Project Mugen for PS5, PC, iOS, and Android. I feel like this is the game that I may have been talking about earlier, but maybe not. Yeah. I feel like I saw a game called with Mugen in the name. But yeah, I don't know if this was the game. Definitely have some major animated visuals going on here on these screenshots, which interesting that they are actually animated screenshots, because almost always on Komatsu they are given static images. This may be the first case of a Japanese press release adopting to times and having animated GIFs, which is what I assume these are. You can make animated JPEGs, and I think you can even make animated PNGs and WebP images. But yeah, very pretty looking visuals. That doesn't inherently mean there's any more of a game here, though. We have definitely seen a lot of very pretty looking smartphone first games or smartphone focused games that still boil down to very generic grindy gameplay mechanics or microtransaction focused gameplay mechanics. But yeah, this has me a little hyped. A spaceship repair simulation game called Uncle Chop's Rocket Shop launches in 2024 for the PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC, which It's a funny sounding name, to say the least. Yeah. I'm just trying to find, potentially, a better acronym for describing YouTube Shorts. Right now it says new or trending game. I would like to say something closer to new, upcoming, or trending game. But I don't want to use more words, I want to use less. So if I could find something that was like the letter N, the letter U, and the letter T, which would spell nut, I guess, that would make sense to have a shortened series just called the Nut series. But I don't have enough followers for that to really make sense to be in period U period T period game. I need to find a word that people would recognize. I guess you might say interesting game, but then that's fairly subjective. Maybe it needs to have some kind of label, but I don't know what to do there. If I was big enough, popular enough, I would just call it the Nut series in UT, new, upcoming, trending. I could call it the TUN series instead. But yeah, I'm still giving that some thought, and I'd have to figure something else. Figure out a different word. Maybe I'll write each of those words into a Google search for synonyms, and then find different synonyms for the words new, upcoming, and trending, and then see if I can find a different acronym that might make some more sense. Although maybe I could, ideally I just want to find one word that isn't an acronym that would make sense. Moving on, Like a Dragon Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name, has an overview trailer and developer update. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth special trial version is included with Like a Dragon Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name. Honkai Star Rail version 1.3 update Celestial Eyes Above Mortal Ruins launches August 30th. Would it make sense to make YouTube Shorts around games that aren't on Steam? I could certainly add on Steam for an acronym, an initialism, since all the games I am making YouTube Shorts are based on Steam listings. Let's see, Alice Escaped for PS4 and Switch launches August 24th, which it was released on Steam on January 27th. And it did make it to my wish list, perhaps mostly just because I am a bit of a sucker for Alice in Wonderland games. Here you can see this is moe style anime girls being the characters from Alice in Wonderland. Let's see if I can name them all. Let's see, you have Tweedledee and Tweedledum, I think, being represented as one character here with the eggs. You have the Mad Hatter, and I would assume this is either the Dodo or the Jabberwocky. And then you have the Cheshire Cat back here. Yeah. And then which one of these are supposed to be Alice? Kind of hard to tell. I'd assume it's the one on the left. But it might be the one on the right. And then who would the other character supposed to be? Who knows? Well, regardless, the fact that it's being listed on older consoles is definitely targeting a larger audience, but they are being fairly cautious here and not bothering to make the newest console games. There is definitely an argument to making PS4 versions or Xbox One versions of games still. At this point, you probably would just make a series game and say the series game is forward compatible. I don't know what phrase it would technically be backward compatible. Or you would say it's an Xbox One game that is forward compatible to Xbox Series, but all Xbox One games are forward compatible to Xbox Series games. All PlayStation 4 games are forward compatible to PlayStation 5 consoles. But yeah, it creates a branding nightmare to say the least if you tried to do something like that. We talked about the free-to-play multiplayer shooter Delta Force Hawk Operations being announced for PlayStation, Xbox, PC, iOS, and Android. These definitely do seem like these are Americans. And it does seem like crossbows, compound bows, are going to be a thing too, so I don't think you could take it super serious as a series. I don't think Delta Force, I don't think I've ever heard of Delta Force in the past. It obviously was a series that existed, but it almost certainly was way below in popularity to Modern Warfare or Call of Duty series. And so it very likely would be a struggle to have a third competitor in the military first-person shooter genres competing, but who knows? It could happen. Now is probably the best time ever to try. Moving on, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle R DLC character Leon Abacchio has been announced. I probably mispronounced all of that, but it's been a long time since we've heard any talk of the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle R game series. I imagine JoJo fans were satisfied enough with the series, with the game, but it didn't become super popular or super prevalent. We didn't see it at EVO being played in large numbers, or I didn't see anybody playing it at EVO if it was played. Moving on to GameDeveloper.com. Let's see. Baldur's Gate 3 will get a physical PlayStation 5 version in Japan. It'll be interesting to see if that sells particularly well in Japan. On a certain level, I feel like the amount of text and the amount of rules in a Baldur's Gate 3 game and a Dungeons and Dragons game in general could be very, very popular amongst Japanese people. But I'm not 100% sure on that. The fantasy, the Tolkien-esque fantasy setting may not be that interesting, and the art style may not be that interesting, and the time commitment may be a problem. Yeah, I on second thought, the time commitment is probably a huge problem for Japanese people that just have to always study and have to work. The idea of having weekend Dungeons and Dragons group gameplay is almost certainly ridiculous. There are people certainly that go to like pachinko parlors and spend hours and hours there, but yeah, I don't think that the time commitment really will work. It'll be interesting to see if Baldur's Gate 3 sells well, or particularly well, or is well received in Japan. Let's see. Ubisoft has designated Far Cry's brand producer Sandra Warren as brand vice president. Having worked with Ubisoft for nearly 20 years, Warren now manages the entire Far Cry brand and the teams that work on it. Inherently, this is showing that they are committed to making more Far Cry things, but it also highlights that there is a desire here to put new people in charge of the Far Cry series and hopefully have the Far Cry series become a little bit more successful. Here you have the most recent characters, antagonists and bad guys of Far Cry prominent, and they were just not that interesting of characters. And then your protagonist is just a faceless nobody in the foreground, which I think that's part of the problem with Far Cry, is that there probably should be a actual protagonist character and less emphasis on individual bad guys each series, each game. We talked about the second $20 season pass for NBA 2K24. We talked somewhat about Dark and Darker's US copyright case being dismissed. Mostly because South Korea is just the better place. It's a change of location dismissal, basically. Let's see. Hi-Res Studios is allegedly cloning actors' voices with AI. It's claimed that the Paladins developer isn't just having AI clone performance of voice actors for the game, it's also reportedly not letting the actors opt out of having their voices rights being signed away. Which, yeah, immediately before even the technology is there, we're having these bad stories of people doing as much ridiculousness as they can to disenfranchise and underpay or not pay voice actors. Of course, it's always hard to really care about voice actors losing their livelihood when so many other people in the world never had a livelihood, never had a chance of a livelihood, or have lost their livelihood too. It's really hard to care about a voice actor when you're struggling to keep yourself like fed and clothed. And yeah, this I guess will be my weekly reminder of my personal opinion that universal basic income would fix a lot of this. And I think it makes a lot of sense. Otherwise, we're just going to continue down this path until society collapses into rebellion or chaos or whatever. Or we somehow get past money and all being a thing, but you can't get past the need. People still need clothing, need food. Well, arguably, maybe they don't need clothing, but I think people would be upset if they didn't have it. But they need shelter and food and water, and if those three things didn't cost money and were just given out, then money would stop being as important of a focus on people's every single thought of every single day mentality. And as far as video games and voice actors would then work to get prestige, and then there would be no desire to make a lesser quality product using artificial intelligence to save money. Of course, it's much more likely that they will just try and limit or pass laws against artificial intelligence first, but then there will just be another technology that comes around to do the same thing. And there is a very good argument to say right now all artificial intelligence is illegal. We're just going to consider it straight up fraud, which is a fair enough argument. Like, having a computer misrepresent itself to confuse humans into thinking they're hearing a different human. In most cases, that would be fraud, or it certainly could be considered fraud. We very possibly may see game companies and gamers make lawsuits against companies like Hi-Res Studios saying you perpetrated a fraud on us. You told us that you made this voice sound like a voice actor we know, and this was instead an artificial intelligence. Or you perpetrated a fraud on us because you made it seem like humans were being paid for this creative work and humans were not. That probably won't work as a lawsuit, but I wouldn't be surprised if it starts happening. Anyways, Sega has completed its acquisition of Rovio. We'll see where that goes. A longtime Call of Duty developer, David Vonderhaar, has departed Treyarch. Vonderhaar was with Treyarch for nearly 20 years and had a key hand in the development of the mainline Call of Duty games, which inherently I don't know if that's going to really change the way Call of Duty games are made in the future. Call of Duty games are, I think, pretty formulaic, and so I think you could probably stick to the same formula if you lost even half of your creative team. There is also, as somebody who hasn't really paid a lot of attention to the Call of Duty series, I think a lot of ups and downs as far as Call of Duty zombie games being fairly good, and then Call of Duties in modern war times being slightly better than World War II, being slightly better than World War One. I'm not sure they even have ever made World War One timeline Call of Duty games. I will say that his tenure, or 20 years, at working on Call of Duty's games probably means he's released a lot more games than most in 20 years, considering how annualized those products are. There was actually very little pushback or talk about the Xbox Strike system with it being announced. I saw one other video game YouTuber talk about it, and that was it. So I guess Microsoft didn't make that big of a deal of it, and frankly, what they were saying wasn't that insanely big of a rule system. It didn't seem too draconian. And honestly, the biggest complaint I saw about people talking about it was that people might just game the system and decide to be a jerk and get a strike, and then know that they were going to take the weekend off and go on vacation anyways. So, but honestly, I don't think the system really would work that well. Plus, I also feel like the strike system is set up in such a way that unless you just go on an absolute tirade and get 8 strikes in one move, you're unlikely to really be able to get 8 strikes. You would have to, in a month, get 3 strikes, then next month get 3 more strikes, then next month get 3 more strikes to get up to 8 strikes or something like that. It would probably take 5 to 6 months even if you were trying to get to 8 strikes. And I do definitely appreciate that none of those strike systems led to absolute termination of your account. Although I think they're still very much reserving the right to skip the entire 8 strike system and just terminate your account if you do something particularly bad. It definitely feels more like a system for little kids. Which that does bring about an interesting thought, because there really, when I was in school, wasn't a demerit system or strike system, not like a Harry Potter's demerit system. And I feel like there might be some logic in having a clearly explained strike system in schools. The demerit system in Harry Potter's didn't make a lot of sense because you had too large of groups of kids all getting combined demerits, which really wouldn't have been very fair, instead of individuals getting demerits, which makes a lot more sense. But yeah, the dictatorship and mentality of schools that I was in when I was a kid basically let the teachers and principals be the judge, jury, and executioner. And so if the teacher decided or was in a bad mood, you could be expelled, or that you could just be given a detention or a warning based on whatever they liked. And that almost certainly has led to a lot of unfair treatment of kids, where if a teacher doesn't like a kid, if the teacher doesn't like a kid because they're a minority, even, they can treat them differently. And very often that was the case, that rich white kids in particular were allowed to get away with things or given more lenient punishments than poor people or minority people. We already talked about Take-Two removing the GTA mod. Alright, so now we're going to do the Steam Fall List cleanup. Let's see. Island of the Lost from 2021. Looks like it's an asset flip exploration game. Maybe a bit of a puzzling game, but at this level, I don't think I can say yes to something that irrelevant just because it might be a puzzle game. We're going through everything starting with I. Islands of the Ancients came out April and has 6 user reviews, so I'll give it a little bit more time. This one looks a little bit prettier, but still very much feels like an asset flip game. Island Farmer jigsaw puzzle is very positive, so we'll put that on the wish list. Island Bender from March. Looks like it's a multiplayer game. And yeah, it's not something I really have interest in, so I'm just going to take it off the fall list. It's probably something I put on the fall list just because I made a YouTube short on it. In general, I have to kind of make that assumption. Isla Sinola looks too weird and isn't relevant, so it's gotta go. Iron Sky Lunar Adventures from February. It has only 4 user reviews. Let's see. Short and Bizarre is a most helpful review. So yeah, I like Bizarre. I don't particularly like Short, and this doesn't look particularly amazing as a point and click adventure game for $5. Next we have Iron Mandate, steampunk roguelite with unique fighting mechanics. You're like warming your way around things and shooting missiles. That really does not feel like the kind of game I would want to play. I'm surprised that people enjoy it as much as they seem to be. So you basically just have these background areas that you're warming through and around, and then you have different abilities to shoot, and it looks like each button might activate a different ability. So your warms are only going to be like 4 long as far as buttons go. Yeah, I think I have to say no to this. This is just not something I would be willing to learn or go with. It's too weird of an idea. Like, I feel like I would struggle with this quite a bit. It's also early access. It's free, so the price might also be a big factor on that too. If it costs money, I imagine you would get more negative reviews. Let's see, next we have Iron Guard VR, which is just a VR tower defense game, which I think I can legitimately say I would never play a tower defense game in VR any more than I would play a tower defense game outside of VR. Next we have either Ira or Era, which looks like it's a roguelike bullet hell shooter with some visual novel story elements. Yeah. Not 100% really sold on bullet hell shooters. That I'd want to play them in general. And so for that reason, I'm just going to leave this on the follow list. And then we'll move over to Ionia, which looks like it's a very colorful puzzle. Hour-long interactive story in VR. It's very pretty, but it's also $9. Yeah. 5% of the proceeds going to the Steve Irwin Foundation. That was... I remember this game. That being said, I don't think there was any real controversy around this because it wasn't ever talked about that much. It's a little surprising you don't see more of that, where games just straight up say, we'll give 5% of our proceeds always to a charity so that we can potentially promote our games by going to a charity. Although it probably didn't promote their games when you see that this came out September 23rd of 2021, slightly before the pandemic, I think, and it has only 75 reviews because it's a VR game in part, but also just because it wasn't really reviewed that well. Invincible Adam Eve as a game is relevant enough to stay on the follow list. It isn't even out yet. And then that brings us to all new games on Steam. Let's burn through these fairly quickly. We have, let me make sure this is YouTube family friendly. Looks like it is. Something in Japanese called Love Yuri. That's girl on girl lesbian visual novel. Doesn't look particularly like the most diverse backgrounds as far as the screenshots, and I imagine it mostly is just telling a story, and that's about it. $2.39 English and Chinese, notably not Japanese. Next we have one that is in the adult section called Nun and Light's Unreachable Forest, and you have a 2D flat, kind of colorful nun anime girl being depicted very largely with a background of a very small square RPG Maker looking game. Nun and Light's Unreachable Forest is $9.83. It's English, Japanese, and Chinese in the languages. And yeah, these are the type of games that I would expect more of. Here's what the nun looks like. I would expect more of these types of games to show up in the adult section where they belong, and yet so many of these games don't. It has 15 basic CG custom graphics, and then 30 adult scenes, which is not really that much. 3 different endings. Definitely not something that comes off as very polished. Where you have the exact opposite in this next adult game, Dark Desire Mute 6, which is the 3D CGI characters with more of a realistic color palette in images. Of course, you get the feeling like because they're 3D CGI that there's movement, but it's very possible that this visual novel, more Western style visual novel, is all pre-rendered images too. This is more of a collection of girls that is in what they're calling the Cindy universe. It's basically the same developer puts out a game like this every week or so. This time, Dark Desire Mute 6 is $7.19. it's English, allegedly, full audio, fully voiced. For the price, it's a little too expensive, though. Or arguably way too expensive for depending on how much actual content it is. Let's see. Next we have an actual game we can show, but I don't know if I can actually explain what is going on here. It, as far as I can tell, seems to be trying to take the concept of maybe having lane animals, and there was a 2D game like this that was, I think it was called Super Auto Pets. I think it's taking that concept of having things in lanes instead of having something front, behind, forward, and back, and making everything 3D. The problem with that is Super Auto Pets has not been talked about in months, and putting this extra effort to make it 3D has only confused the visuals to the point where the game looks like absolute garbage. And yeah, even Steam's recommendation algorithm, I think, is going to have a real hard time realizing that this is trying to be Super Auto Pets. They're comparing it to Plants vs. Zombies more than anything. Super Auto Pets failed in itself by just not having enough variety in gameplay or enough reason to keep on playing. And in all fairness, Super Auto Pets is probably a game that was talked about on Giant Bomb, or some other mainstream video game journalist was talking about and playing it like crazy and overhyping it. Which, yeah, I have gotten a lot better about not falling into those traps of thinking games that are important and relevant when they really aren't. Although I think I've gotten pretty good about recognizing that most mobile games aren't going to be that important or noteworthy anyways. Like, I'm still playing the Star Trek Lower Decks game, but I have absolutely nothing new to say there, and I'm struggling to even remember the stories. Part of the problem is they have events that tell you one story while you're also going through the main story, and it's just very confusing if you're not paying enough attention to know what is happening in one narrative versus the other, and there's no way to recap the stories as far as I can tell, which is silly that you just can't go back and see previous chapters. Think we can say no to this asteroid heist space game. I'm not a huge fan of space games anyways. But yeah. Looks like we've got maybe a Chinese or Japanese demo here. Book of Hero. Let's see what language is Chinese. 3D visual puzzle game. Solving puzzles. Not the worst idea ever, but nothing super special there. Let's see. Next we have an adult game called Hentai, and then the P word for female genitalia. I guess I should probably censor myself a little bit more that way. It is just a basic slide puzzle, square puzzle, 8 pieces game. And maybe not even a slide puzzle, maybe a swap puzzle where you're swapping the pieces, which is even simpler. I would also point out that when you say hentai, the animation style here is a 2D flat style that's not really in a colorful palette, or that I would say is anime-esque or Japanese animator. It definitely feels like it's more of a Western animator, drawing little devil girls with horns and tails and nothing else, not wearing anything else. It's selling for 74 cents by being 25 cents, 25% off, which, yeah, that is I imagine a lot of these games are. There's a huge collection of how many? 63 other games with hentai in the name. And the languages it says it supports is all of them. Definitely feels like a Western low effort adult game. Although I will point out that the price is much more realistic. I could see somebody who is super rich saying 74 cents doesn't matter, and therefore I would buy a game that looks like it has 10 slide puzzles for 74 cents. In the real world, if you were to buy a cardboard puzzle, you're not going to get it for 74 cents. In comparison, you almost certainly find a single software that would chop up images you can find online into square puzzles very easily, and that single software would maybe cost you $10, and then you could have infinite number of puzzles. But yeah, it's really hard to argue with things that cheap. Next we have a game called Slime's Cannon Combat, which looks like a player versus player game, early access, online PvP. I'll make a YouTube short on this, but I'm not going to put it on the follow list because I just don't care about it. I don't care about online PvP. Here we have Fish on the Desktop, which is another one of these desktop pets applications that aren't really games, and I see no reason to ever make YouTube shorts on these. It's just a silly concept. I'm willing to curate away from that. Here we have Clover's Day Plus. You've got some moe and maybe slightly taller moe kawaii anime girls in a visual novel. In a lot of ways, I think moe as an art style is tending to lean to have slightly taller characters these days compared to previous years, but they're still very much anatomically giant heads and really short. Yeah, I would say if this is the exact same character, this is closer to what moe used to be, and this is closer to kawaii, and moe in general is sometimes even shorter than this. Yep. But yeah, you can kind of see by the school uniforms here, or college uniforms, whatever they might be, and the fact that they're wearing like maid outfits and working side jobs, or they're being idols and wearing dresses like that, that these characters are going to be represented more as older. $27.99 is quite the price here, though I have to point that out. Japanese full audio. Is this a continuation or spin-off of any other anime series? I mean, visual novel series? Doesn't seem like it. And here we have animated GIFs in the description of Steam, which that's not completely unheard of. Alright, so we put that on the follow list. Noticeably, this developer and publisher is not one I really recognize, but I really haven't done the most amount of effort to follow publishers of visual novels. And we'll make a YouTube short on that, and I imagine there really won't be a problem, although you never know, because when I make the YouTube shorts, it's showing off these videos, and these videos aren't playing because I've disabled them with the plugin, in part unintentionally, in part intentionally. Next we have a game called Daisy Flies to the Moon, which just looks like an RPG Maker garbage game. Here we have yet another one of these airy games that this developer floods Steam with. Every couple weeks you get another airy game where you're flying around, just by a different name. It looks like it is almost certainly the exact same game, just being resold over and over again. But weirdly, Valve has not done anything about it. I don't think they sell enough for anybody to care, and I don't think people see it often enough to care. Tick down. Let's see. 2 real-time hours to locate and defuse the weapons of mass destruction. Use the powers of earth, wind, and fire. It's an interesting idea. Can you play the game a second time after the first 2 hours, though? It is somewhat surprising that you don't have more games where you can control the 4 elements. And in particular, this is a very fast-paced dual hand arena shooter. I'm interested in seeing if this is somewhat well received. I imagine it wouldn't even get 30 reviews, but I'll make a short on it. Let's see. Next we have a pinball game called Xeno Tilt, which, okay, it looks like a decent enough pinball game to put it on the follow list, make a short on it. Kind of crazy it's in early access, but whatever. Next we have a game called Surreal House, which looks like a puzzle game. Doesn't seem terrible enough to say no to it. Should I bother to make a YouTube short on it? Yeah, I don't think I want to over curate here. So even though the visuals aren't amazingly good looking here, it is also worth recognizing that YouTube shorts are inherently disposable, and so one bad YouTube short getting only 1 view, whilst other YouTube shorts might get 5 or 6 in the first hour, is not a big problem. And I think there's perhaps more freedom in having just less quality YouTube shorts than there is in having less quality videos, pre-recorded videos. I don't think you probably will get dinged as much there. Extreme Bus Driver Simulator as a game doesn't look that interesting. Again, I'll say I'm not really following too much around the controversy around Linus Tech Tips, but I am seeing that they are not making content. Yeah, that they're investigating and trying to do better. Although clearly this is a example, I think, to learn that if Linus of Linus Tech Tips personally had retired, say 6 months to a year ago, when he was talking about feeling really burned out and thinking about retiring, he would have potentially not created as much of a problem. Although some of the complaints, as far as I understand it, around Linus Tech Tips has a lot more to do with just bad procedures, bad management, and just like real lack of having an adult in the room, which also very possibly falls on Linus. A lot of it, I think, also comes straight down to just the desire to make a ton of content to be successful on YouTube, and YouTube, I think, definitely deserves more blame than they will ever get as far as the rush to make content and not really care about the quality of the content or the accuracy of the content as much as they should. In part, some of that is definitely YouTube's fault, in that YouTube does not allow anybody other than the top tier, most successful YouTube producers to in-place edit their videos in a good way. So if somebody misspeaks or says the wrong thing, if I misspeak or say the wrong thing in my video, even if I wanted to fix it, I really don't have a way of fixing it. I'd have to delete the video and then re-upload the video, and then that would just be disaster for like all the algorithms and watch time and views. This game, Plenty Carts, is obviously nothing I would be interested in. I commissioned some bunnies too, is also yet another game that is flooding Steam, where I commissioned some series. Every couple weeks you're getting some hidden object games. Although in all fairness, these hidden object games do seem to be delivering on new images. Just a little too many of them. A little too much, I imagine, in price. Hidden object games here, you have a bundle of, let's see, how many games? 25 items? Yeah. 25 different I commissioned something hidden object games, all of which I wouldn't be surprised may just be images that are also being sold in physical books. And in all fairness, if you were to buy a hidden object book, you probably would be spending about $4, but digitally getting a discount, that's asking too much. Let's see, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is now got some screenshots. There is something here that I think may be part of a problem around the idea of making a game around Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which might also have been a problem with the Friday the 13th series, is that it doesn't really let you go into a lot of different locations. There is, in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, as I understand it, basically just a house in the desert. So you're not going to have any spooky forests, potentially. You're not going to have a lot of different types of buildings or different locations. Same was the case with like Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th, you were, for the most part, in a camp near a lake. And that's most of Friday the 13th. Maybe a cabin by a lake. Weirdly, this does also kind of feel like it's almost player versus player, where you're knocking down somebody else so you can escape. And they showed a gas station location and a couple of locations, but they all visually seem the same. And you are basically getting stalked by the player playing as Leatherface. Weirdly, it doesn't seem like they're focusing in on any of the other characters, or at least I'm not recognizing the other characters. And they're saying it's based on true events, and I imagine the true events are nothing close. Well, definitely make a YouTube short on that. There'll probably be a decent number of people trying to search the Texas Chainsaw Massacre on YouTube and then end up seeing shorts based on this video game. And that won't be clickbait because it'll say new and trending game there. I am also noticing that it is very positive and it's already out. I didn't realize that. So far, so good, I guess. Surprising. But it'll be interesting to see if the numbers stay up. We have a very high all-time peak of today of 16,000 players. That's big enough for a multiplayer game. We'll just have to wait and see if the numbers stay that high over the next week or so. It is a multiplayer game that really only survives if people stick with it. Infasia just looks like an RPG Maker game, so we'll say no to that. No creeps were harmed tower defense. Looks like it might be slightly more interesting design pathways for a tower defense game, but it's still just a tower defense game. Anything that has TD in the name, and I've seen increasing numbers of games with TD in the name instead of tower defense just to get away from saying tower defense. But Tower defense or TD is basically going to be a no for me. Yep. Big Adventure Trip to Europe is a hidden object game. Which, yeah. I have hit a point where I'm not willing to curate away hidden object games, so I will make YouTube shorts around them, but there's no point in putting them on the following list, and I'm not going to actually play them. Next we have another adult game, so we didn't have full bundling, although we did have a lot of adult games in a row. This one's called Girls Rest, which is flat 2D but more natural color palette style. Ladies all seemingly on a bed posing in kind of more boudoir poses on the bed. It isn't the hardcore type of shots where it's just straight up the goocher or that they're interacting with an adult. They say it's a classic memory game, but I'm not seeing any part of the actual memory game element. I wouldn't say the art style is particularly great, nor would I say it's particularly terrible. Yeah, I'd say it's probably better than average, actually. But yeah, it is just a memory game for $1.99, and then there's an art book and a soundtrack as DLC, which is a little weird. It's part of a bundle for $9.07. It's English only. The question here, I guess, would be how many pictures are there, and it's not telling me that. In fact, the description is notably lackluster. So I would have to assume at this that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pictures. Since it's not saying 5 pictures for $1.59, which doesn't make it worth it by any means. Next we have a game called Dungeon X Dungeon, which looks like a platformer game. Metroidvania dungeon crawler is what it's tagged as. It looks visually polished enough to deserve a follow, so we'll give it one and move on. So we try to burn through all of this. Bomb Rush Cyberpunk is out, and we can see it is overwhelmingly positive so far, with 705 reviews, which I guess that means I don't really need to leave it on the fall list, and I can just prematurely put it on the wish list. Just make sure it's a single player game. Yep. This is the example of something that really should have some reviews and coverage for it, but so far today, even waking up late, I have not seen anybody cover it or talk about it, which probably just means they didn't give early access to any of the mainstream video game journalists or YouTubers. I bet by Monday we will have people talking the praises of Bomb Rush Cyberpunk quite a bit. It might be a long enough game to justify taking a weekend on it instead of rushing out to give out your initial impressions, which notably for the YouTubers I follow, most of them don't do initial impressions or quick looks, as Giant Bomb used to call them. Like that idea has, I think, lost its appeal at some point, or it just wasn't embraced. DF Retro does like technical quick looks at games or initial impressions, and that's about it. Here we have yet another one of these platforming asset flip games that does not look like anything really interesting, so we can just skip it quickly. Here we have a game called Evil Officer. Let's see. Which, yeah, we haven't really seen a game fall onto the concept of a evil officer or bad cop. Movies and TVs, really, you don't have that many bad cops depicted. But yeah, there definitely would be some room for that, but the problem is you'd have too many people who are just pro Blue Lives Matter as a concept, which is just effectively anti Black Lives Matter as a concept, that phrase in particular. And in a video game, you could easily avoid those controversies by just having anybody else be the bad guy. And so why not do it? Why not just have a zombie attack you instead of a bad cop? Yeah, this feels like this is a fairly low effort game that may very well just be a Russian troll game that is trying to stir up controversy. I'm probably going to fail miserably on this. Weirdly, this is also claiming an ESRB rating, which it almost certainly does not have. Although ESRB was letting people self-rate at one point, I don't think they were continuing to let people do that. Valve really needs to step in and create a different system, a better system than the ESRB's rating system, which has not been improved in decades and hasn't really done the best job of informing parents. I literally had a parent ask me about Zelda Breath of the Wild, and as if she thought that Zelda Breath of the Wild was an adult game with, I don't know, sex or drinking or something, or gambling in it. And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with Breath of the Wild for your 10-year-old. They totally can play, and you should totally know that Breath of the Wild is fine. But this person also seemed to not know anything about the ESRB because they don't know anything about video games, and they just haven't even looked at the cases or the covers. Although in all fairness, they also get a bunch of used covers from me, so they may not have the ratings on them. Although I think the GameStop covers do have ESRB ratings still on them. So eventually I emailed the person. I said, hey, here's the ESRB's website, which in all fairness, the ESRB has not done a good job of telling people you can go to their website and search the name of any game and see a full description, much more detailed description than what's on the label in the front. But weirdly, for Breath of the Wild, the ESRB has not also pandered as much as something like Focus on the Family may, or some of those other websites that are heavily conservative or Christian based. So when they're describing Breath of the Wild, they did not mention at all that at one point in Breath of the Wild you end up dressing like a girl and cross-dressing to sneak into a female-only village, which I could see some conservative people flipping out about that and saying, why is Link dressing up as a girl to sneak into a place? Which it's obviously just depicted as a cartoony, silly thing he has to do in the game. It's not done for any kind of titillation or to corrupt the minds of the youth or anything like that, but as much as like Bugs Bunny cross-dressing was just done for a silly reason. But there are people out there that say Bugs Bunny cross-dressing was inappropriate. I'm gonna say no to Grow Flow. I'm talking way too much about it, or looking at it way too long, not talking about it at all. Viking Hiking, 3D platformer. Not the funny name. You've got a good name. The question is, can you turn that into a good game? But yeah, there are other services if you're incredibly conservative, but at a certain point, if you're upset or if you're so out of it that you don't know that Nintendo games are designed almost 100% exclusively for E10 plus age range, then yeah, you probably aren't going to like video games in general. So yeah, but yeah, it can be informative certainly to at least know what your kids are going to see. There is the possibility. I don't think there are too many parents out there that but there is a possibility that there are some parents out there that would say, "Hey, I want to know that this content is in the game, so I'm prepared to discuss it with my kids if they bring it up." Uh, Although parents actually discussing anything with their kids versus just dictating to their kids is fairly rare. I like this Viking hiking game. I'm gonna say yes to that. Let's see. But yeah, at a certain level, even the most super Christian based or conservative websites that are reviewing video games um, are still probably allowing slightly more kids to play video games, which they need to play video games. It's just what their peers are doing. If all their friends jumped off a bridge, then yes, just let them jump off a bridge too at a certain level when it comes to video games. So, yeah, if a tiny 1% of people going to focus on the family type websites, which that may not even be a real website, helps, that's probably fine because it's not really going to stop the super anti-video game parents in any way. There's not that many of parents out there like that, but there definitely are some parents that are just like, no to video games, no to any outside. You're going to basically be Amish, which Amish is a great example of that, I guess. Murder of Crows we can say no to. Nothorian Online. That's a big name, but the game itself looks particularly pixely. I'm gonna say no to that. Bestial Reception. It's a top-down twin-stick shooter game. Should I make shorts around these kinds of games? I don't know. I'll say yes. How many more games do we have to talk about? A lot more, apparently. So we need to hurry up. Untold Atlas looks like it's a decent enough visual novel. It says it's an anime otome sim. Choice-driven expedition visual novel. Yeah, it's probably more of a schedule management style visual novel, would be my guess. Voidborn. I guess more of these arena shooter games should get YouTube shorts too. I'm noticing that increasingly here I am choosing to make YouTube shorts on games but then not put them on the fall list, and I think we're fine on that. I saw somebody put up a YouTube poll about which game from the past didn't get enough love, and they mentioned a game that I remember playing called Geist, and so I voted on that to see how many other people had voted on that poll. And yeah, Geist was at dead last, so they were definitely voting for more recognizable games that frankly got a lot of love already on old consoles. And Geist is the example of a game that there should be something like that, where you're a ghost taking control of other enemies. But I think there was maybe a flaw in that idea that every time you got killed, you would just get knocked out of the body of whatever body you were inhabiting. So it was really hard to die in the game. Plus, Geist had some puzzle sections that maybe people didn't like versus the experience. This game, Wretched, looks like a good arena shooter, so I'll give it a follow. League Tower Defense is just yet another tower defense game, so I'll say no to that. Like Antipsychotic looks like it is just some random crazy visuals. Docu-music albums help to destigmatize mental illness by allowing the user to journey through the mind of an individual with bipolar disorder. For 59 cents. If it was free, I think I'd make a YouTube short on this, but I have some concerns that this may just be an asset flip garbage game. I also have concerns that game developers probably shouldn't be speaking their truth or trying to help spread mental disorder stuff. It always comes off as not as well thought out or not as well written. If you told me that a group of psychologists made this game, then I would buy into it more. But I a lot of times feel like this is just people trying to use mental illness as a way of selling a product, which that does not seem moral. Labyrinth. Looks a little too dark screenshot syndrome for its own good. Yeah, and there we're seeing the back rooms. Just that makes it feel way too asset flippy. If anything, I suspect this is a somewhat nicely visually designed game that repeats textures and assets like crazy while you're trying to escape randomly generated mazes and apparently being chased by zombies. Weirdly though, it's very positive, so I guess I have to be just consider myself wrong. And I guess if something is trending, something is trending, so let's make a YouTube short on it. Why not? I can be wrong. I can have a totally different opinion than what most people have. I always need to be open to that. Cardboard Town is out. My concern here, though, is that I already made a short around it somewhat. This too is very positive as a card game city builder, which is an interesting idea. So I'm going to put this on the wish list, but I'm not going to make a new short around it. Next we have Lawgivers 2, which doesn't look like anything of interest. Next we have Haunted Investigation. I will say it is going to be my hope that starting on Monday I'll stream on more of an early time. I was awake at like 6 in the morning and I almost started the stream at that time this Friday today, but yeah, I just didn't get to it. And I'm gonna say no to Haunted Investigation. Let's see, Ducky Bounce. So this feels like this might be a 2D attempt at getting higher and higher by bouncing, which at the very least, that is a different art style and a different twist of a Jump King type game. It doesn't seem like the bubble ever bursts, although it does seem like it might have some somewhat wonky physics. You have a girl with a duck on her head in the bubble. It doesn't seem like you are just going all the ways to the left or all the ways to the right. So yeah, it definitely feels like it's got more going for it as an idea. And I may be wrong, and it may not really be even a always going up type game. It might much more be a full journey and full experience with narrative and different levels. Let's see. Next we have Deck Weaver Descent into Chaos. Is this a VR game? It's free. It's had 2 all-time peak people play it. It came out today. Visually it doesn't look like much. You'd think it would be a VR game, but it isn't. I'm going to be extremely generous and put this on the follow list just to see if maybe it gets some attention, but it's not going to get a short, so it's not going to get attention from me. Golf it. Looks like a decent golf game. I haven't seen a golf game in a long time, actually, as far as putt-putt mini golf. They used to see one or two of those a week for a while there. Let's see, Vectorio doesn't look like anything. Project Third Eye is already mixed reviewed, which I think would help me easily dismiss the game. Yes, it does. We have 2 more games to cover and then we're done for today. We're still, over this week, getting to 3 to 4 hour streams. There is almost certainly a slower pace that I'm moving at because I'm starting lower later. But also, I imagine there was just a lot of games this week. Or planting trees is already negative, so I'm going to say no to that. And then that's the end of the show. So yeah, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to support me further, there's some links down below in the description box. At least for the moment there are. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.